The following is a project of our nonprofit newsroom. Support Midcoast Morning and local journalism today at chly.ca/donate. Local news doesn't survive without local support.
Hello and welcome to Midcoast Morning. I'm Joe Pugh. Plans to light a section of the E&N Trail next year won't be going ahead as funding has been reallocated to other to-be-determined projects. A section of the trail between Northfield and Rock City Road had been scheduled to receive lighting upgrades in 2026. Instead, around $1 million of funding will be redirected into other pedestrian and active transportation projects next year. Today on the program, we'll bring you Council's discussion on the matter, and I'll speak with Nanaimo City Councillor Tyler Brown, who moved the motion that led to the change. We'll also hear from Phil Hall, President of the Nanaimo Area Cycling Coalition, and Jamie Rose, Manager of Transportation with the City of Nanaimo. On December 8th, Council ultimately voted 5-4 in favor of Brown's motion. Here he is introducing it during a special council meeting.
With limited resources, I think if we're spending our if we're spending capital on active transportation projects, I think we have a whole list of projects around schools within some of the neighborhoods where this money could be better spent. That is a dark section of the E&N corridor for sure, but typically people that are riding into the evening hours have the appropriate gear and the lights on their bike. And so if they are active riders, some of these other projects, especially around pedestrian safety, I think could definitely benefit from this funding. So I think it's money better spent, and I hope Council will support it. Thank you.
Various members of Nanaimo City Council expressed their positions on the issue. Here they are, beginning with Councillor Ian Thorpe.
As I spoke on last Wednesday, I guess it was, I would prefer that we go ahead with the E&N project, which we have discussed before, and rather than put this money into some unknown projects for future, I see the E&N as a very important recreational facility, which is extremely well used, and I feel that it also does speak to pedestrian safety for the users of that trail in the early morning or evening hours when it's very dark in places. So I don't think I can support the motion on the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Armstrong?
Thank you. A question for staff. If we remove the E&N Trail lighting, there's been lots of incidences, and I know I'm aware of some of them, where people then don't use that trail at night and they actually use the highway because of that. Can you comment to that if you have any knowledge?
Mr. Sims.
Thanks, Your Worship. Just briefly, one of the rationale for putting in the trail, other than we could and for recreational purposes, was really to move people off the highway, especially during slushy or winter events, just to allow that commuter route. And this goes back to Mr. Harding's era in the 90s, I would say.
Thank you. Yes, I won't be supporting the project. I think the money is much better spent on the E&N Trail, where that trail is used constantly. And as a person that drives that highway at all different times, days and nights, you quite often do see cyclists and pedestrians on the highway because it's better lit. And $1 million doesn't buy you much sidewalk where it really does help the trail. So for those reasons, I won't be supporting this at this time.
Councillor Gesselbrock, then Councillor Eastburn.
Great, thank you. Although I'd love to see the lighting on the path, I do think that at this stage of the game, that level of investment in active transportation it could go farther with the backlog of community requests and needs for different safer and accessible amenities on the streets. Thanks.
Councillor Eastburn.
Thank you. I'm not going to support this because I have been hearing about plans to light this section of the E&N for a really long time, and I know that it's a well-used area, and we see people traveling in the dark, and that section of highway is it's not lit at all, so it's very, very dark at night. And so I really actually see this as a key section of our pedestrian and active transportation that we should do it properly so that it can be used as the connective spine that it really is in Nanaimo.
Thank you. For what it's worth, I am going to support the motion. I think it is an appropriate use. My observation of the trail, particularly at nighttime, is there are lots of adjacent buildings, etc., and various other lighting from cars. The likelihood of some horrible altercation involving a speeding motor vehicle is impossible on the E&N Trail, whereas the other projects that staff have identified over the years strike me as being more worthy of safety. As I said, and I don't want to sound like a cynical old guy from Coombs, BC, but when I grew up, there was no such thing as street lighting. If you rode a bike at night or walked somewhere at night, you either chose to walk in the dark or you took a flashlight, you wore clothing, you put a light on your bicycle, whatever. You took some steps to protect yourself at night. So for what it's worth, I just think that the better bang for the buck safety-wise is in what Councillor Brown's motion suggests, so I will be supporting it. Anyone else? Motion's on the floor. All those in favour? Councillors Gesselbrock, Hemmens, Mayor Krogh, Councillor Brown, Councillor Manley, and those opposed, Councillors Armstrong, Eastmere, and Thorpe and Perino. The motion carries.
Phil Hall, president of the Nanaimo Area Cycling Coalition, called the move disappointing. What did you make of this decision, of this motion that council voted for on Monday with regards to pedestrian funding and a planned project on lighting the E&N Trail?
Well, the decision is actually very disappointing for cyclists. We have nothing against, in fact, we're all in favor of pedestrian improvements, but there doesn't seem to be a solid rationale why to remove this funding and to delay again the improving the lighting of the E&N Trail. I can say that having watched the proceedings and listened to Councillor Tyler Brown's rationale, it seems to center around that bike riders have lights and many places pedestrians don't, so they don't need to light these trails. And I think that's a basic misunderstanding of the E&N Trail because it's a shared pathway with pedestrians, and pedestrians don't carry lights, nor should they have to. So it has this just as much reason to have street lights as a street does. So that doesn't seem to be solid reasoning for that. And from a cycling point of view, once again, it feels like the rug's being pulled out from under us. There sounds like there was a council decision at some point in the past to put this lighting in with, and as I said, with very little rationale. They're pulling the funding again. And this is an arterial route for cycling in Nanaimo. It should be a top priority. Instead, it sounds like active transportation users are, fighting for scraps in a way that motorists, seldom do, certainly not for arterial routes.
Now, if you had to prioritize funding for new cycling-related projects in Nanaimo, what would you prioritize, and where would lighting upgrades on the E&N Trail fall on that priorities list?
That's a complicated question that probably can't be answered in a few minutes, I'm afraid. There are many connections to make. So Nanaimo is putting in cycling routes and cycling lanes where there are new developments. And as we know, there are little bits here and there as the developments are made. So that is a very high priority for us. And another high priority is the connections to use the E&N Trail, which is a arterial and a spine that runs up the length of much of Nanaimo, to then allow connections into other parts of Nanaimo. So those are high priorities too. But much of that comes away from the fact that E&N Trail itself is a very high priority. And to make it safer, and to make it easier so that more cyclists use it, I don't think we really, if it's already been decided that that's the next thing to do. So we see no rationale for putting that off, or in fact, in this case, simply deciding not to do it.
Phil Hall is president of the Nanaimo Area Cycling Coalition.
Midcoast Morning is part of our nonprofit newsroom project, supported by listeners like you. Keep this program on the air by funding it today with a monthly sustaining donation at chly.ca/donate. We've got tote bags and shirts if you need an incentive.
We're following up on a decision earlier this month to reallocate funds away from lighting the E&N Trail between Northfield and Rock City Road in favor of to-be-determined active transportation and pedestrian projects. Nanaimo City Councillor Tyler Brown moved a motion to make the change, which ultimately passed on a 5-4 vote. I spoke with Councillor Brown about the motion. Could you explain the thinking behind your motion to reallocate funding from planned lighting upgrades on the E&N Trail to other to-be-determined projects?
Yeah, absolutely. So in any given year, we have a funding that is put towards different active transportation projects around Nanaimo. A project that has sort of been identified for some time is the lighting of the E&N corridor with respect to the trail and the paved path there that folks do use, and they use it quite regularly. With that said, there's also a whole bunch of unfunded projects around schools, especially or around Nanaimo, especially around schools for pedestrians. That would be great to see a big push to see some of those projects realized. So there was about $1.2 to $1.3 million allocated for the E&N lighting in the 2026 budget. I thought we could better utilize those funds for some of those smaller but very important projects elsewhere, and put that forward for council to consider, which they did pass. So those funds will be repurposed for next year to see some of that infrastructure built up around the community.
Phil Hall, who's the president of the Nanaimo Cycling Coalition, suggested that during council's debate on this, one idea that was talked about was the fact that cyclists will often have lights on their bikes. But he suggested kind of missing from that debate was the idea that pedestrians, when they're walking around, wouldn't be expected to carry lights on a major route in the city, and that there could be some potential danger there with cyclists coming up across pedestrians in the dark on that route. How would you respond to that idea?
I would say that's a very I would agree. It's very legitimate. It's a legitimate concern. At the same time, we're trying to allocate limited resources. So I don't disagree that at some point that corridor should have some lighting, in particular in some of the darker sections. Just at the same time, I think from just an overall community perspective, it's in my mind, a lesser priority, just with respect to lighting existing infrastructure, existing pedestrian and active transportation infrastructure would be great, contrast to places that don't have any at all. So that's where I think we have a lot more of our resources and effort should be spent on building out places that don't have any of the appropriate infrastructure.
Are there any other projects or spots in town you might have in mind that you feel would be ideally suited for some big pedestrian or active transit upgrades?
Oh, in terms of like large capital upgrades, I think there's a whole, building out the active transportation network and getting a very connected grid would be ideal. This funding would be more utilized for kind of those one-off projects around schools or intersections that are problematic for pedestrians. So there's a whole list of them that gets generated every year, and they tend to be unfunded. And so this is more geared towards those small capital projects rather than a large capital expenditure, but metro or things like that. This is really meant for those neighborhood level projects that need some funding.
Was there any particular reason that you're aware of that this E&N planned lighting project was initially presented to members of council among potential decision points during the budgeting process?
Yeah, it's been this has been a project that has been identified for I want to say at least my time on council. So going back 5-6 years. So it's not out of the blue by any means. It's been something that's been thought about and intentioned. And at one point, the cost of it was significantly lower to do the whole route. I think the reason it was presented as a decision point was I had raised it early with council as something that I wanted to talk about. Unfortunately, I missed one of the finance and audit committees to bring it forward at the committee level. But so staff and council were aware of my intention there. So I think that's why it appeared as a potential decision point that had been kind of pulled out from the greater budget.
Is there anything else you'd like to let people know on the issue, either about that motion and that project, or just around active transportation and pedestrian safety upgrades in general?
I think the problem is always we find ourselves in a situation where we have limited resources but a great need to improve active transportation around the city. So what we've tried to do in recent years, and staff have really been great on this, is we're doing infrastructure updates, sewer, water, that sort of thing. We try to improve the surface as much as possible. But that same approach often doesn't allow us to go retrofit small projects in areas that can have a great community impact. So thankfully, we've seen an increase in that funding in general. It's 300,000 is what it used to be. Now it's 500, 600,000 per year. And the intention of this is really just to provide a significant capital boost over the 2026 period, and hopefully chip away at some of those many unfunded projects that don't ever have funding identified for them in the next 5 years. So this is really meant to just get chip away at that list and hopefully see at the neighborhood level some of those projects that are important to the community get met.
Do you see a pathway or a timeline for that lighting project on the trail to ever come back before council or be achieved in some future way?
Yeah, and I think importantly, so it has been something that's been contemplated for quite some time, and this is something that will get done. I think the importance there is like a large project like that, not just the section that have been identified, but for the whole corridor. I think it is pretty well suited for granting from either provincial or federal programs. Now, we have been quite successful in recent years with securing grants for active transportation. Metro comes to mind, but there's some others as well. With the state of things, of course, federal and provincial monies are questionable now in the near term, but a project like that I think makes a great grant application, where some of these smaller ones that I'm talking about tend not to, right, unless you're bundling them in a creative way. So that's where I think if we're using some of the funds we have now, if we direct them towards those small projects, we're still positioning ourselves to be able to try to secure grant money when it comes available for that larger project.
Councillor Brown, thank you so much for taking some time to do this.
Hey, no problem, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Nanaimo City Councillor Tyler Brown. I also spoke with Jamie Rose, Manager of Transportation for the City of Nanaimo, to better understand what this change means on the city's end.
So there's actually two fairly noteworthy kind of pieces to that conversation. The first was the approval of a business case to increase the annual funding within this envelope. And so just kind of recalling the pedestrian unallocated budget was created in about 2018. And that was standing at a regular $300,000 line item. Throughout COVID, there was a couple of times when council opted to increase that, but the base value was $300,000. And it was very explicit in that it was for pedestrian improvements. And so with our business case, we identified that it may be there may be an opportunity to broaden that to all active transportation. And then we provided a couple of choices for council to find ways to accelerate bridging some of the gaps in the system. And they approved the option to add an additional $300,000 annually for the next 5 years. So over a 5-year horizon, we've got an additional $300,000 annually, which gives us a total of $600,000 a year to invest in active transportation. But as you noted, there was also a discussion around a project to light the E&N Trail, sort of along the golf course section of the highway. And council, through some discussions, decided that they felt that it would be preferable to redistribute that into the active transportation pot. And so, as you noted, we've got close to $1.5 million next year to invest in more active transportation funding. And so, the sort of we did allocate a portion of the 2026 funding or a sort of couple of months ago. And so we knew we had a little bit left, and so we had a plan to finish allocating that money early in the new year. But with this sort of increase in budget, we have a few ideas of what we want to do with it, but we're going to have to sort of drill into that a little bit better, acknowledging that this larger chunk of money gives us a bit better buying power and gives us a greater opportunity to make some big inroads into sort of full spectrum corridor improvements. And so not just necessarily intersection improvements for pedestrians, but potentially something along the lines of what's kind of coming along on Wallace Street right now, where we're reallocating some space and creating some buffered bike lanes in partnership with the adjacent development. So so that will be a report coming to council. I expect potentially middle of January, latest would be middle of February.
So you have close to $1.5 million for next year on active transportation and pedestrian safety projects, and you've already allocated a little bit of that. Mid-January, you're going to be coming to council with suggestions on what you think you can do with the money. Is that a fair summation?
I think we're going to come to council in January with a small portion just to sort of wrap up what we previously has sort of had in our minds as to how much money was left to spend. And now with this big injection, we're going to have to take a little bit more time to make sure we spend it wisely. And so I would expect that sometime later in the spring would be when we bring the report to allocate the full remaining allocation.
How do you determine what the priorities are for that money?
So when we were going through the sort of update and creation of City Plan, the whole Nanaimo Reimagine process, which gave us our new official community plan, we also did a companion project to create a new pedestrian prioritization model. And so we'd had sort of internal, very technical spreadsheets and algorithms and things like that we used to identify, where we thought the greatest need was. But it was a little bit of a black box to the public. And so we always were getting sort of questions about, well, why A, not B, and so forth. And so we took that opportunity to work with council to build out a more simplified version that still created the same, it could fulfill the same intent. And so over that period, we had several touch points with council and highlighted, here are some of the traditional elements like speeding and crosswalk distances and volumes of traffic and collision history. We also looked at sort of future-proofing things and saying, okay, well, we expect to see densification in these areas and we expect to see higher pedestrian demand. So we may have a location that has a very sort of strong driver right now, but we can also look and see that in the near future, this location is also going to have strong drivers. And so, as I say, we worked through that with council and sort of gave them the opportunity to weigh in on how they felt about how we're weighting things. Through that process, we also added some social equity elements. And so, that was a very important element to us because there are some people who really shouldn't have to be encumbered by owning a vehicle to be able to meet their daily needs. Like car ownership is a very expensive venture. And, we didn't want people to have to do that. Those funds could be far better utilized for other things. And so, one of the weighting factors is household income through sort of Stats Canada results. And so that sort of rounds out the sort of reactive, proactive, and then sort of really kind of aligning it with the values that the city's cast through city plan.
What happens to something like the E&N Light project? So when the funds, it's voted to reallocate the funds to something else, what happens to that project on the priorities list? Is it kind of dormant until someone from, say, council brings it back, or does it come up again?
I think there's probably a few different options. The one that sort of seems most probable to me is when it comes up for an asset renewal. So if it needs to be resurfaced, if there is, I don't think that section has any utilities under it, but if something, if there's sort of a peripheral in influence to it, that would be the time to add the lighting or add some landscaping and do that sort of task. As an example, so there's a future water main project. It's quite a few years out, but we do expect that it'll come forward in the next decade or so. Going from Rock City Road roughly along the E&N corridor up to Mostar. And so that would be an example of, when there's an opportunity to sort of make those enhancements, whether it's widening or adding lighting or things of that nature. So my suspicion is that would be the most probable path forward. There's always an opportunity for the project to come back through a different path. And so we may see that. I'm not really sure at this point.
Jamie Rose is Manager of Transportation for the City of Nanaimo. The interview you just heard was part of a larger conversation on transportation in the city. Look for that on an upcoming program. That's our show for the day. Thank you for joining me. I'm Joe Pugh, host and producer of Midcoast Morning. Jesse Woodward is our executive producer, and Arby Frew is our technical advisor. Our theme song is First One by local Nanaimo band Waste Management. You can get in touch with us at news@chly.ca. That's all for now. I'll talk to you on another Midcoast Morning.
This program gives thanks to the Nanaimo First Nation as we broadcast and podcast from their traditional territory. Thanks for listening.